Good afternoon. Welcome to Inside Out. I'm your host, Tana Hartman-Thorne, and we are here today with Patricia Schroeder, and we are going to have Phil Cohen, the labor organizer, and both of them are musicians, and that was a song from their CD, Threads of Gold. Phil, are you there? Phil?
Yes.
Ah, good. Welcome. We've got you on air.
Okay, it's great to be here. I expected to be in the studio, but as I let you know, I retired actually from the union in 2011 and wrote a book, The Jackson Project, War in the American Workplace, that got released by University of Tennessee Press last year. But just last Friday, I got a call from one of the union's directors asking me to come out of retirement and lead a campaign against an effort to bust one of our union locals in Eden, North Carolina.
Eden.
At Mohawk Industries.
Uh-huh.
And successfully defeating union busters was one of the specialties of my career. And this has been a very fast and furious action. Truth is, they should have called me in a month ago, and I'd have gotten way ahead of this thing. But they called me in at the point where the decertification petition had already been filed and the National Labor Relations Board was about to set an election date. And I've spent the last several days literally working 18-hour days to present compelling evidence to the Labor Board that this is a company-dominated, a company-conceived decertification effort, that the employees acting as the anti-union committee are acting under instructions from the company and receiving discriminatory treatment, meaning they're allowed to run around all over the plant and get paid to do it, trying to get people to sign the petition, that management has actually been approaching workers and threatening them if they didn't sign the petition. And all of this violates federal law. And so having presented a good prima facie case to the NLRB, they have blocked the election. That just happened yesterday. It is a major victory, and they're going to spend the next several weeks investing our charges. I'm going to naturally have to present all my witnesses to give sworn affidavits, and at which point I'm very confident that the Labor Board is going to consider the petition to be invalid on its face because it was company conceived and company dominated, and throw it out. Local will survive, but still got a lot of work ahead of us. And I got to say that the leadership, the committee of Local 294T did an absolutely outstanding job talking to their coworkers and finding witnesses and helping collect evidence. I have never seen union leadership under fire go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds as well as these guys did.
Well, that's encouraging, but let's give a little background here. Your book, The Jackson Project, War in the American Workplace, is a memoir of your career as a labor organizer, and you did that for 23 years, was it, before retiring?
I was actually in the field full-time for 23 years. I was the rank-and-file chief steward of my own local for 8 years before that. It's actually a memoir of one campaign for the most part. It is a memoir of one of the most really intense and dramatic campaigns of my career against a union-busting textile company in West Tennessee in 1989-1990. It's presented like a novel. It's a dramatic work. It's first and foremost about the people and what they went through, because for me, to this day in this career, the work I do isn't out of some abstract, politically correct philosophical doctrine. It's entirely about the people.
Yes, absolutely, and you make that quite clear. Your book reads really well and very quickly, and in fact, it's a compelling read. It's hard to put down.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Dana.
So I want to give a little bit, I want to read a little bit from the foreword by Cy Khan about the background. Today, workers and their unions stagger under the weight of a relentlessly relentless, spectacularly funded assault from right-wing political movements and multinational corporations. Unions in the U.S. have seen their numbers and power wrenched away. Collective bargaining for public employees has been outlawed in state after state, including North Carolina, I insert. Pension plans have been gutted and dumped. Health and safety regulations go ignored and unenforced. The Jackson Project takes us back to the era when these forces were first gaining momentum and won union locals fight against them. It's bad enough that so many of the rights and benefits have been legislated away or given back in exchange for an empty promise that if you agree to work for less, we just might not close your plant. Millions of jobs that allowed our parents and grandparents to create the possibility of better lives in every sense for us are gone forever, deliberately shipped abroad in the search for greater profits. When Phil Cohen came south, there were more than 1 million textile workers in the United States, 3/4 of them in North and South Carolina. There are almost no textile workers left in the U.S. now. The looms, cards, spinning frames still run day and night, but now they run in some of the poorest countries in the world where the mill hands work nearly 2/3 of the day, 6 and 7 days a week, behind high chain-link fences topped by razor wire, patrolled by police and private security guards, one of the fastest-growing industries in the world, in exchange for the right, quote-unquote, to live in almost absolute poverty and deprivation. And that's what you were working in the middle of. You leapt right into the fray, but tell us a little bit about how you got into it.
Okay, first let me just throw in, it's interesting because this fight that I'm involved in right now is at one of our remaining textile plants. Mohawk manufactures rugs and carpets, but this is a textile plant with looms and with the departments you'd normally associate with a cotton mill.
Uh-huh.
And we are dealing with old school anti-union textile management who decided to take a very underhanded and vicious shot against the union, which includes threats to close the plant if the workers don't decertify the union, which is of course total nonsense. But in terms of how I got into this, I'm from a blue-collar background. It wasn't a happy childhood, to put it mildly. I left home when I was 16 and just lied about my age and started working for a living full-time since I was 16. Signed my first union card in 1974 as a New York City taxi driver. Moved down south following the thread of a relationship, as one does when they're crazy and in their 20s. And anyway, ended up in Chapel Hill. And within a number of months, I had become a Chapel Hill Transit bus driver. And there was a union local there, Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1565, but they did absolutely nothing to be of assistance to the workers. North Carolina law prohibits collective bargaining of municipal employees, so they kind of considered us a lost cause. And the leadership of the local kind of considered it more of a hobby and an ego inflator rather than a responsibility. So after I'd been there for a year, I was at this, kind of boiling point of frustration, having come from a union environment in New York and just seeing the way folks were getting mistreated and the local was doing nothing about it, of feeling someone's got to do something about this. And you kind of looked around the garage and thought about it and finally realized if someone was going to do something about it, that someone had to be me. And to be honest with you, my first response inside myself was, oh, damn, do I really need to do this? But I got myself elected chief steward of the local and found ways, despite the bar on a union contract, to force the town of Chapel Hill to negotiate one agreement with us after another, simply leveraging them through the media, through contacts I made within local political organizations like the town council, got them to reinstate countless workers that they'd fired, and one thing led to another. and they came to the attention of what was then the Clothing and Textile Workers Union, the union that Norma Ray was actually, the movie Norma Ray was a dramatization of.
Romanticized, as you've made the point in your book.
And I got hired as a lead organizer and troubleshooter in 1988.
In 1988.
Yep. And since that point, I essentially was the person that when union locals were under attack, or there was simply difficult union locals to deal with, I was the person sent in to clean house, in essence, by any means necessary, no questions asked, which is exactly the kind of campaign I'm running right now.
Well, are you glad to be back in the fray?
You know, I'll tell you, it's kind of funny, but I was saying to Patricia just a few weeks ago, you know, I'm kind of feeling that itch. I really wish I had another campaign. I really wish I had another mission.
Well, your wishes come true.
And be careful what you pray for.
That's right.
But as soon as my phone rang last Friday and the caller ID had mentioned like 5 numbers, and I knew it was the Carolina director of the union, I just knew this was it. It's like in some way I felt it coming. And it's been really crazy playing catch up. In the last 5 days, I've done like 5 weeks worth of work, but it's paying off. I started out this project further behind the 8 ball than I've ever found myself in my union career, and now we're like way ahead of the game. And if we maintain our momentum, which I'm confident we will, this is going to be a major victory for the union and a major defeat for those forces that would try to make America union free.
Well, Lord knows we need it. If I'm not mistaken, it says in the book that a decertification attempt has never succeeded when you on one of your...
On my watch. That's correct. And in fact, I stood up in front of the membership at shift meetings yesterday, and I told them that. I said, you know, I have never had a union local decertified on my watch, and there ain't no way in hell I'm going to let you all be the first.
Well, one of the things that makes your book so compelling is your dedication to your daughter. You had a little girl that you refused to abandon, to leave, to go and put work in front of. And throughout all of this, you kept up your contact and your responsibility as a father beautifully. And talk a little bit more about what that was like.
Well, look, Coley was my heart from the moment she was born, and I looked into her blue eyes. And when the Jackson campaign was happening, she was 4. She wasn't in school yet. And, you know, I waited till she was ready because it's a long 13-hour trip away from her mom, and her mom and I were separated by then. But she wanted to come with me on the road. So kind of, you know, every, couple of few weeks, I would take her back on one of my two-week stints in Jackson, then bring her back home. And so we had some incredible adventures on the road. And I guess another dimension of the book is that it's kind of an unconventional travel adventure between a father and a young daughter. At a certain point, things in Jackson got downright dangerous. I was walking around carrying a gun and sleeping with it over my bedpost, and naturally at that point, I had to stop bringing my daughter and didn't get to see her for a couple of months. And after that, after Jackson, I was offered a major promotion. I mean, a promotion that would have really taken me to the upper echelons of the labor movement. But it would have meant my living on the road and hardly ever being home. And I insisted on an assignment where, at least for the most part, I would work in the Carolinas, so that, even though I'd be traveling, I could at least spend nights at home as often as I spent nights in hotels. Every now and then I was asked to deal with a crisis out of state. I did one in Pennsylvania, one in Wisconsin. I refer to them as away missions. But after Jackson, I got to spend 90% of my career, working with and fighting for locals in North Carolina which allowed me to be a father to my daughter growing up. And that's the best decision I ever made in my life.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and throughout the book, your segments with Coley, or is that how you say her name?
Yeah, Coley, that's right.
We're really moving to. I'm as a mother and a grandmother, and as someone who had at one time, I worked away from my family. I really admire your dedication to family.
Well, I very much appreciate that. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to juggle both, but I think it's really important for a parent that's living a fast lane lifestyle to just not get so seduced by it, they forget their own kids.
Yes, absolutely.
What the hell good is it if you save the world but you abandon your own kid?
You're absolutely correct. Well, let's talk a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the book and writing it. What was it like writing it? How had you kept copious notes or something?
Here's the thing. I've always been a writer, okay?
Okay.
Back when I was a kid on the streets of New York, I'm talking 1920, all that, I used to write memoir just about the streets of New York and publish them in New York-based magazines. Not stuff that paid a fortune, but stuff that did pay me. And so I've always been a writer.
Uh-huh. I've seen you've had several books, because I looked you up, and they're...
Actually, no, they're not me. There's someone else with my name.
Oh, really?
This is the one book I've had published, but I have had a lot of stuff in magazines. And I always knew I was going to write about Jackson and the rest of my career at some point. I realized kind of early on it is impossible to write about one union campaign while you're running another, or perhaps several. But I saved every single scrap of paper for my entire career. Frankly, I don't take a lot of notes. I take scribbles, but I remember details really well, so I'm not a copious note taker. But I saved every single piece of paper, every appointment book, every expense report, so that one day I could reconstruct my campaign. So the first thing I did for several months, after I'd been retired for a year, had a year of just total R&R and doing nothing, I went into my garage and dug out every single piece of paper from my piles of cardboard boxes of all of my union material, absolutely, totally, thoroughly disorganized from having moved a number of times. Got out every piece of paper related to Jackson, sometimes having to scrape the mouse droppings off the bottom pages of a box, and then put them all in chronological order and arranged them by month. And that took several months. Once I had done that, I shut myself up in a room for a year and a half to the exclusion of everything else in my life, and I ripped my heart and soul out and poured it into a manuscript. And when my first draft was done, Patricia edited it.
That was a good editing job.
Patricia used to be an editor for a major news organization, and she's absolutely brilliant, and she did some outstanding editorial work on the book.
I wondered who had done the editing, because as I was reading it, I was thinking, I'll bet this had a really good editor, too, in it.
Well, and that editor was Patricia. And, naturally I had to do some work with the copy editors at the press. But what I consider significant contributions to the book from a copy editing standpoint were made by Patricia. She has a byline at the front of the book. And so once it was done, I then began the process of submitting it and trying to get someone to read it, which I will say to everybody out there who's thinking one day I'm going to write a book, this is not a game for the faint-hearted, any more than union organizing. But I did get a publishing deal, and then there was another just year and a half for the whole process you go through with the publisher, and it was released in July 2016.
Well, it's apparently, every review I've read, too, has been very positive. So there may be one or two out there that I haven't found, but everybody was really moved that I've read or spoken with, really moved by this story.
Yeah, I've been really gratified by the press I've gotten, but what's honestly been even more gratifying is I constantly get messages on Facebook from union members all over the country telling me how much the book meant to them. It's almost hard to say this without starting to cry and like thanking me for writing the book and thanking me for my whole life.
Yes.
And that has meant more to me than anything, more than any review, more than any news article. I've been at union conferences and I've had like workers I'd never met before just come up to me and like hug me and like throw their arms around my neck and like not want to let go because they'd like just read the book and how much it meant to them. And for me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and it actually comes through too in the story, in the book, that this is a labor of love, of a deep and abiding love for people.
And and that's how I feel. I mean, that's how I felt yesterday, standing in front of the membership of 294T. I said to them what I always say to people in a fight. I say, from now on, until this is over, your campaign means more to me than everything else in my life put together. I'm your soldier. I will fight for you, and if I have to, I will die for you. Because that's my number one commitment. They will have a union logo. I have a phrase that I coined that I use in DSERT campaigns. I kind of put it into the fancy Gothic kind of letters, and I've used it on the 2 leaflets I've already written for them, and that's the union is here to stay. And I never make a promise unless I believe I can keep it.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. Let's bring Patricia into the conversation.
Patricia, and I will tell you this too, this is sort of a good time to do that, because sometime in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to have to do a very radio unfriendly thing, which is stop and put gas in my car, or I'm not going to actually make it to the studio.
Okay.
But that's going to happen in about 3 or 4 minutes unless I run out of gas, in which case I will not make it to the studio. So start talking to Patricia. That's just good timing for that.
Okay. All right. We will. You go get your gas. Patricia.
Well, I'm still with you. It's going to be like 5 minutes till I get to the gas, my exit where the gas station will be.
Okay.
But I'm getting close.
Okay. Patricia, I misspoke earlier. I said Patricia Schroeder, who is, as you know, a California legislator, and it's Patricia Ford. And so welcome, and tell us about you in this. These all, which one is on? That one.
This one's on.
You got it?
Yep,
okay.
got it.
All right. So tell us about how did you meet Phil, and how did you get involved in all this?
Well, I first met Phil in a social context. There was a person who invited me to a Thanksgiving dinner party, and I went, and that's the first time I met Phil. We didn't really connect as partners like we are now until almost a year after that, when I was at the same person's house at her birthday party, and that was the night that he and I connected. And by the end of the evening, when most of the other folks had already gone home, we were sitting at the table talking about lots of things that we found, that we were finding very quickly that we shared, and thinking, I kind of like this guy. and I was a little taken. I got to admit, I'm a sucker for a pretty face, and I was kind of taken by his blue eyes. And he resembled, I sort of jokingly say he to my eyes, he's a cross between Nicky Cage and Pete Townsend, and I just love the look. It's my kind of look.
That's great. Well, what did you think about his he was still very actively involved then, was he?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Yes, he was. The first encounter that I had with him, I don't think we talked a whole lot about the union. He said he worked a lot. I remember that much. But a year later, he talked a little bit about having just come back from Pennsylvania at the Greif campaign. And I was, just found it all very interesting. And I knew next to nothing at that point about unions. And this was all a new world to me that interested me at a personal level, because I'd had some stuff happen at my workplaces, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. I remember going to the Labor Department in Durham with an issue that was impacting my health at a workplace, and he just very curtly told me, "We don't take individual cases." And I looked at him sort of strange, and I said, "What do you do?"
Yeah, what do
and
you
it
do?
was the wrong question, actually, because that would have been a very long answer, and what I should have asked him was, "What do I do? Is there anything I can do? And if so, what?" I just didn't, it didn't occur to me at the time, but I understood something wrong was happening. I was having to deal with some paint, and I wasn't given any kind of safety equipment to wear with it. I worked for a small graphics firm, and the stuff I was using was really toxic to breathe, and I had to spray it on. And
you weren't given a mask, or
no, and I had to pay out of pocket for my own safety equipment, and it just didn't seem right. But I only learned later, about how detailed and complicated it can get to file a case from Phil.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had no idea that you don't do it through the Labor Department. It's Justice Department. It's different.
Yeah, it's a very convoluted. I came this weekend from an event up in Asheville where we were looking at the legal system and the regulatory system, and just how, as one of the organizers put it, the system isn't broken, it's fixed. And
That's exactly right. Amen.
yeah, it's fixed in favor of big money,
Yeah, like games are
multinational, multinational corporations at this point. And I'd like also for us to talk about where you see, Phil, this going. Are you available yet?
No, I haven't even done the gas yet. I'm going to be at the gas station in about 3 minutes, but I will share this on another note, or another perspective on this. Before you switch gears. A couple of weeks ago, T-Bird looked at me and sort of blinked her wide-eyed. He said, every girl that grows up in a middle-class house secretly loves a bad boy.
Yes, I'm sure that's
I was
true.
looking at one at that birthday party. I just had that feeling about it. And not long after I start seeing Phil, and my parents were still alive at the time, my mother I told her what he did, and I had already been on a couple of road trips with Phil to some of the stuff that he was doing, and had just spent the last trip handing out my very first leaflets with him. And my mother was, she said, it's interesting that you wind up with a guy who does this. She says it runs in the family. My father and my grandfather were both union men up in Ohio. Her grandfather was a coal miner, and her father was a union railroad worker for the railroad that serviced the mine.
Oh, wow.
Up in southeastern Ohio.
So it was in your blood.
Yes, it was in my blood, and she said it's interesting that you wind up there again. And she would give me things that she would clip out of newspapers, and I'd give them to Phil to add to his files.
Oh, very good.
yeah. About stuff that it wasn't just general union stuff, but sometimes she would find things that involved him.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh.
or projects that he was working
on.
Uh-huh.
Great.
Yeah, so she was herself also a supporter. She said, if we hadn't had the union when I was growing up, she said we all would have starved to death.
Lord. Yeah.
So
and
she knew what it was about.
what distresses me is that we're still at this point. And now, it's
Yeah, we're
around
not-
the globe.
Yeah. We're
that-
not far from it, even with the labor movement having happened. We're still not very far from it.
No, it's true. I look at it in this country and see that we're facing a real struggle, but it's not just here. We now are swaddled in these labor agreements that are made by multinational corporations on behalf of our country, that basically give all rights to the corporations and none to the workers. And so, Phil, I wanted to ask you what you see happening. Where do you see this going now? Oh, I think you
I'll
maybe.
say two things.
Uh-huh.
The labor movement is never going to be extinguished in the United States because we are the most tenacious, resourceful folks on the face of the earth. Just like we're fighting it out locally here in Eden, North Carolina,
Uh-huh.
the union will is never going to be broken. But that said, the biggest problem in this country is really how complacent and gullible so many Americans are. I mean, to bring it home to the present situation, the way the company built and indoctrinated its anti-union committee to give the appearance that this was like it was a worker-sponsored desert instead of theirs, is they arranged to take people who they felt they could mold into the anti-union leaders, and they took them to visit a non-union plant in an entirely different industry where the workers bragged and told them how wonderful life was without a union. I mean, people in this country are so easily influenced and indoctrinated by authority figures and have so little sense of just self-respect and their own entitlement. And what's happening is that the American dream hasn't been stripped away. It's slowly eroding away the way water erodes away rocks over, hundreds of years. And so when people have something and they lose it all, they're up in arms and ready to fight. But when folks are losing 1% of what they have every year, 20 years go by and they have 20% less, but they just sort of start tightening their belt and it becomes the new normal. And I think, unfortunately, things are going to have to reach this critical mass where enough people have lost enough. Enough people that were making $15 an hour working in the factory are now working at McDonald's and Walmart and making $7 an hour without any benefits.
Yeah.
Enough people are going to have to be affected till a critical mass is reached, and then we hit a turning point in terms of a resurgence of real social activism in this country. And to update you on a practical note, I am now sitting in front of the gas pump. I'm going to stay plugged in.
Okay.
I'm going to stay connected to the call. I'll call you back if I lose you, but I'm going to keep the call going, and I'm just going to pump and roll.
Okay.
And then I'll be at the station in less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk with Patricia. Patricia, how
bit more.
did you all got, besides this bond, music has apparently been a great bond because you are really gifted collaborators musically. So how did you discover that?
Thank you. Well, that happened pretty quick, actually, the first evening that we connected. He got around to asking me what I had been up to, and I had just come in off the road from, like, I call it my other life. I was with someone, not Phil, I had another partner, and we were buskers. to mention what that term means. It's a street performer in general. Although a lot of buskers are musicians, and part of the time, it was for about 4 years, part of the time was in America, but the best part was the second 2 years that I was busking. I was in Europe, which has a tradition of street performance, and that goes back just centuries.
Yes.
So it's totally accepted over there. In most places, you get a little resistance in some locations, but in general, by and large, and especially smaller towns where they want more tourists, if you are a little bit of an attraction, yeah. And local people liked it too. It was it was different.
Yeah.
And they like variety over there. I mean, diversity is one of their things, It's like we have a lot of diverse ethnicities and cultures, and people, have been like invading Europe all from everywhere for, a few thousand years. So, we enjoy, vive la différence kind of mentality there. So when you show up and you sing music, that's different from what they hear on a daily basis, they'll stop and listen and throw you a few coins in the guitar case or the hat. We learned how to play tables. We almost starved until we ran into an American who said, "No, you have to do it like this."
Oh, really? What's
yeah,
that?
we
What do you
didn't
mean?
know what to do.
Okay.
We didn't know how to do it. When we got there, we figured, we'd do it just, pretty much the same way as we did in America, which didn't work. And you just pull up on a street corner and put the guitar on the pavement and in front of you, and you stand there and play music, and people pass by and drop you coins, and that's not what they do over there. You go and it sounds invasive, but people actually are very receptive to it. You go and play in front of people sitting at sidewalk cafes, and in some places you can get on trams for a short ride, 2 or 3, anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes, and play a couple of tunes and pass the hat down the aisle on your way out the back door.
Nice.
Of the tram. It's got a nickname. It's called robbing the train.
Really?
Yeah. But it's a laissez-faire kind of thing. The police don't bother you, and unless you are like bothering the riders, the local residents. If you are polite and deferential, and you're not too much of a nuisance. But in America, it's very different, because you're not regarded as an artist or a performer. You are a panhandler in most places. There are a few exceptions to that. I don't know where you go in Chicago, because we didn't try that, but New York's got a few spots.
San Francisco,
where people
too.
go, and
Yeah.
some in San Francisco. And there are a few other, towns. St. Petersburg is a good spot for all buskers out there who might be listening. You can go down there in good weather, of course, and play music. And that city's receptive, because it's a little off the beaten track. It's not your typical American city. And I think in a lot of places where you have places you can go also into some cafes, and if you're going to be around for a few days, and they'll say, well, you can come play for tips, pass the hat and tips, but getting booked while you're on the road is just almost impossible. So that's a bit of a detractor, and there are a lot of small places that don't do a lot of booking in Europe, and if you show up and they got an open spot in a night or two from when you appear, they'll put you up on the stage. We did have a few stage gigs.
Oh, cool.
Over there too, but there's less of everything in America.
I'm back.
So here's Phil.
Here's Phil.
But yeah, Phil asked me about all that, and I talked to him about busking, because he hadn't done it and much, and it interested him that I had been in Europe, and then he asked me, would you like to keep on singing? And I said, sure.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that happened.
You've got a lovely voice. So.
Forgive the digression into the busking, but it was an interesting time.
Yeah, good. We all need those to get us through the tough times.
Yeah.
All right, Phil.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about where things are headed in this country. We have about 15, 20 minutes more.
Yeah.
And you're working because, as you said, you think that the labor movement is never going to disappear in this country. And God, I hope you're right, but sometimes I'm not so sure because, as you say, it's like a frog, boiling a frog. You heat the water very slowly and people don't even notice they don't notice they're being boiled alive.
But I'll tell you, the people who do notice are union members, and especially the active union members and the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The people at the Mohawk plant in Eden, they're not frogs. They knew the water was boiling, and they're ready to do something about it. I know the labor movement will never be eradicated, no matter how hard Donald Trump and his corporate friends try, because I know the people in the labor movement. Because I have fought with them, I have bled with them, I have cried with them, I know them. And because of them, the labor movement will never disappear. But we are having to, in a way, hold the line and, in a sense, consolidate under like the worst anti-union onslaught, I would say, really in the history of the democratized world.
In the history of the democratized world.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I would argue we do not have democracy in this country.
Well, what would be defined as a democratized world?
It's true. One of the things that troubles me is that Americans tend to think that capitalism equates with democracy, and in fact, they're antithetical.
Yeah, and that's it's extremely unfortunate. When you have so many American people thinking they have it good and celebrating rights they only have at best in part, and not caring about rights they don't have. And as someone who has, in his spare time, traveled the world extensively, I've seen such a higher quality of life, such a higher quality of employee morale, such a higher quality of social structure in so many European countries, and even in Canada. And frankly, even in African countries, even though the standard of living by and large is much lower, the rights of workers and the rights of unions are far better protected in many African countries than they are here.
Really?
Yes. An interesting story I'll share with you, kind of a snapshot worth 1,000 words. I was at a union conference back in the early 90s when apartheid was still in force in South Africa. And we had as a guest speaker a union organizer from South Africa who was visiting the United States. And so when the conference was over, he was just standing around and hanging with the union staff at the conference. And he said to us, he said, I honestly don't know how you all managed to accomplish what you do in the South, because if I had to function under the laws that you have to function in the southern United States, I would have never gotten to first base. This is a union organizer in South Africa under apartheid, shocked and appalled by the lack of labor rights in the southern United States, which is now unfortunately spread to many of the Midwestern states.
All right, we're kind of losing you there.
I said that it's absolutely astonishing to have a South African union organizer during apartheid shocked and appalled at the lack of rights that unions and workers have in the southern United States by comparison.
That is a little surprising.
And unfortunately, we're talking about the lack of rights. Some of it's national, but some of it is definitely defined by the right to work laws. And we see those right to work laws now no longer being a southern phenomenon, but moving into the Midwest. there's really slightly more than half the states a right to work. So the assault on unions, kind of as a force within our society, is going full tilt boogie. And, the voting public is what is naive and complacent. Union members are fighting it to the teeth. There are fights in every single state where there are right to work movements taking place. Some of them, sometimes we win, sometimes corporate world wins. But no doubt there's an assault on the rights of working people. With the goal being to kind of drag us down back to the level of being a third world country, dragging us back as close to the conditions of the Industrial Revolution as they can to line their own pockets.
Called the race to the bottom.
That's exactly right. But there's enough people within organized labor that will not be driven to the bottom, and they'll die fighting it if they have to. That just ain't going to happen. Because I'll tell you what, as tenacious as Donald Trump was in his rise to the top of the corporate world and then to becoming president, I'm working right now with a few guys in Local 29014 who can match his tenacity and then some blow for blow.
Okay, Phil, can you talk a little more into the mic on your phone?
Actually, I am.
Okay.
And actually, I'm also literally,
That's better.
I'm in front of Carmel Mall. I'm going to be with you in 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Well, how many union members are there in this country? How many people, what is organized labor like in this country?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know the total number of union members. I can tell you in terms of percent, however.
Okay.
Back in the 1960s, a third of all blue-collar workers were union. When I went to work in 1988, it was 14%.
14, down from 30.
Now it is something like 6 or 7%. Of course, there were professional unions and there were government workers unions, but the heart of the labor movement is blue-collar. Now only 6 or 7% of blue-collar workers in America are union. And I'll tell you, I've been inside a non-union plants that were just organized, and the working conditions had yet to be changed, and especially health and safety. The way health and safety is ignored in non-union facilities, and the way OSHA really has turned a blind eye, and the difference it makes when you have a union in there, kind of putting OSHA's feet to the fire and getting them to enforce the statute is absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I have been inside departments and manufacturing facilities that look like war zones. You have so many people walking around in braces and bandages and out sick. I mean, the difference is like day and night. It's something that your average middle-class American couldn't even begin to fathom in their worst nightmares.
It would be easy for most of us to become very disheartened. How do you keep your spirits and energy up?
It's because it's out of love for the people that I work with and I fight for. It's because out of the love and respect I have for the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, really it's several million probably, of people who are in the labor movement and hanging strong and hanging tough. It's out of my love and respect for them and knowing they are never going to be eradicated, they will always hold the line, and knowing that sometimes in the long-term view of a fight, you have to take several steps back and regroup before you can then take many steps forward. I look at the immediate picture, which is the people I'm working with right now, and the love and respect I have for them, and I look at the big picture, which is you can only push people back so far until they come back swinging, and that day's going to happen.
I pray you are right and that it happens soon, because we have a lot of people are suffering a great deal now in this country. Around the world, we have, and the wealthiest are getting wealthier. And
Well, I am actually about to park.
you are okay.
So
Well,
I
great. We've
so-
got 5 minutes. So we've got like 10 minutes. Okay,
Okay,
just park.
well,
yeah, come on, risk it.
Well, I gotta say, this is the life.
Chat with Patricia for one of those minutes, and have someone let me in.
Yes.
And here I am.
Okay, somebody will open the door.
Okay, so I'm going to hang up now, and I'll be right there.
Okay, there's a green button to the left of the door. If you press that, it'll unlock it and let him in. All right. Well, Phil Cohen, labor organizer and musician, is about to join us. And the spring of 1989, he went to Jackson, Tennessee to work to work with the union at an historic cotton mill. And he was the representative of the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union and came there to rebuild a failing local. There was an anti-union company, as so many of them are, in financial disarray and sharply declining union membership and a lot of workplace grievances. But he hung in there and has written a memoir about it titled The Jackson Project, War in the American Workplace. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you. It's good to be here for the last 30 seconds of your show in person.
Good. Glad you made it. All right. Phil comes rushing in, as we said earlier, from Eden, North Carolina, where he's just become engaged again as a labor organizer. So,
Yep, that's correct. And for those who missed the beginning of the show, fighting a very vicious decertification attempt by the management at Mohawk Industries, one of our few remaining textile plants that manufactures rugs. And we have a company-dominated and driven union-busting effort that we are in the process of blowing out of the water.
what can ordinary people do besides educate themselves? Is there anything that ordinary citizens, people like us, can do to help support?
One of the things that really does make a difference is who's in office. And I'll tell you this, I am in the process of putting together a massive National Labor Relations Board case under a Donald Trump administration. My job would be 3 times easier if this agency of the federal government had Barack Obama as president. But I won a major desert attack, a major desert campaign under the George Bush administration. Took me 3 times as much work as it did winning similar campaigns under the Clinton administration. Because the president appoints the labor board, they appoint the federal judges who can adjudicate labor board decisions. But having labor be a key issue in deciding who to vote for, deciding who wins the Democratic primaries. You know, let's forget about things that are going to be what they are, depending, let's sort of take abortion and guns off the front burner of what makes for a meaningful candidate and put workers' rights towards the top of that list. It's not just obviously any Democrat is going to be a better advocate or perhaps less of an opponent of workers' rights than a Republican, but the question is who wins the primaries? Out of the 5 Democrats seeking the nomination, their stance on workers' rights, on union rights, should be at the top of the list of active Democrats. That's the kind of questions that should be asked of people who want to be the candidate for the Democratic Party. Where do you stand on workers' rights? Where do you stand on the rights of unions?
All right, I will keep that in mind when I'm thinking of questions for candidates. So, you have time to have a seat?
It's better for my back to stand.
Oh, okay. All right.
But if I can, let me mention very quickly for anybody who's become interested in the book during this discussion, it's available any place you would normally buy a book. It's The Jackson Project, War in the American Workplace. But Bitter Southerner magazine recently did a feature about my life and work, and they've got a real good deal on the book and an even better deal on a book album package. So if you're interested in buying the book or the book and record at a real good price from a very, very politically correct publication, check out the Bitter Southerner store.
Okay.
But if you want to do a quick and dirty, Amazon has great deals also.
Okay. And this is published, by the way, the University of Tennessee Press, quite a reputable press. So you want to wrap up? We have just a couple of more minutes, but would you like to say anything? What would you say to our listeners today as a takeaway?
What I would say is everything that anybody who's halfway well off enjoys in their life is built on the blood, sweat, and tears of the working people that made those. Look at any product in your house. Look at the clothes you're wearing. Look at your refrigerator. Look at your floors. Look at your roof tiles. And ask yourself, how'd they get to be that way? Did God create roof tiles on the 6th day? Did God create your sport jackets on the 7th day? Where do they come from? Think about that, and think about what the people who make those products go through to manufacture them, to support their families, compared to what they deserve simply because they're human beings, simply because they're American citizens who more often than not at some point fought for this country, whose kids may end up in the armed forces fighting for this country. What do they deserve for a life of hard work and service?
Amen, Scott. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. I am really sorry, but I hope you'll come back again and talk, and then you can tell us more about the campaign in Eden.
Yes, absolutely. I'm delighted to be on your show anytime, Tana.
Wonderful. I want to thank Patricia Ford. Thank you very much. And Phil Cohen. They are co-conspirators on this book. And it is, again, The Jackson Project, War in the American Workplace, a memoir by Phil Cohen with a foreword by Cy Kahn from the University of Tennessee Press. Look for it online or in your local bookstores, preferably independent bookstores, and try not to use Amazon. That's one of my pet peeves. All right, thank you all for listening, and we'll be back with you again next week, and we'll be talking more about what it means, rights in this country. What rights do we have, and what have we been told we have? Because I assure you folks, if you read the Constitution, it's there to protect property and commerce, first and foremost, and that was the intention, and most Americans are never taught that. So thank you. And tune in again next week. This is Tana, and I'll talk to you soon.
I took my toothbrush, took my pen. I'm on the road again. I'm on the highway. There's a woman waiting at the end of the road. Not exactly the woman I wanted to hold anyway. It's more than some folks got. Been on the road before, be on it again. It's probably where my life's gonna end. At least I'm living. And when I get back, I'm gonna settle down. It's what I said last time round. Jordan know me by now. Honey, can't you tell when I've got trouble on my mind? Honey, can't you tell when I've got trouble on my mind? In out of trouble all the time. Well, now the police, they try to put me in jail, but my crazy schemes never fail. Only my dreams do. And I'm kept busy preparing off for the big things. They never seem to turn out right. And I'm still wondering why that isn't. Honey, can't you tell when I've got trouble on my mind? Honey, can't you tell when I've got trouble on my mind? In out of trouble
been on the road before, be on it again, that's probably where my life's gonna end. At least I'm living, and when I get back I'm gonna settle down. It's what I said last time round. You already know me by now. Honey, can't you tell when I get the trouble on my mind? Honey, can't you tell when I get the trouble on my mind? In out of trouble, in out of trouble.
You're listening to WCOM LP Chapel Hill and Carborough.
Now I said, honey, can't you tell when I get the trouble on my mind? Honey, can't you tell when I got trouble on my mind? In out of trouble, in out of trouble, in out of trouble, in out of trouble, all the time.
Islam. I still credit Mr. Muhammad for what I know and what I am. He's the one who opened my eyes. And at present, I'm the minister of the newly founded Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which has its offices in the